It's time for the EntreArchitect Context and Clarity live conversation. Actually, it's not. If you're watching this live right now on Thursday, November 24th, 2022, you know that today is the observance of the Thanksgiving Day holiday in the United States. So we're taking a couple of days off. But we didn't want you to be without Context and Clarity live. Maybe you said, hey, I need something to do, or I want something to do, or maybe you said, hey, I can't go a week without Context and Clarity live. So we wanted to bring to you an encore broadcast of one of our favorite conversations from the past. Now, I'm going to tell you right up front, this conversation is not without its difficulties. I was traveling unexpectedly for a funeral. I was in Atlanta. I happened to join this conversation from a Starbucks outside of downtown Atlanta. So you can imagine that there may be Wi-Fi signal issues. There definitely were noise issues. But I think ultimately this was a very good conversation between Katharine MacPhail, myself, Erin Pellegrino, and Jake Rudin of Out of Architecture. I really appreciate what they're doing, how they're helping professionals and students in the profession and out to figure out the value of their education, of their passion, of their experience, and find ways to apply that, whether in a firm, in a traditional architecture firm, or in some sort of adjacent position. Now, another reason that we wanted to bring this particular conversation to you this week is that Out of Architecture, the book, here it is, Out of Architecture, The Value of Architects Beyond Traditional Practice by Jake Rudin and Erin Pellegrino. It was just released. It's out now wherever you buy books. It's also available in the audio format on Audible. And from what I have listened to so far, it's a fantastic book, as I expected from Jake and Erin. I know they just had signing parties over the weekend, this past weekend in New York. I know they're excited about the release, and we wanted to, number one, congratulate them on the release and also support their launch. If this book, if jobs in the profession or outside the profession or figuring out the value of your experience, your education, your passion, all of those things, if any of that is of interest to you, number one, listen to this conversation. Number two, pick up Out of Architecture wherever books are sold, or via Audible or any of those things. So with that, I've already taken up too much of your time. We're going to jump right into this conversation, right into this encore presentation of our Context and Clarity live conversation with the authors of Out of Architecture, Erin Pellegrino and Jake Rudin. I hope you enjoy. All right, EntreArchitect community, it's 4 p.m.-ish Eastern, which means it's time to start today's EntreArchitect Context and Clarity conversation. It's Context and Clarity Live today. Welcome. Glad that you're here. Say hi when you get here. Let us know that you're here and where here is for you. Where in the world are you? Where are you joining this conversation from? If we've never met before, my name is Jeff. I'm in Indianapolis. I'm not even in Indianapolis today. I'm in Atlanta today. I'm usually in Indianapolis. We come here every weekday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern for one reason, so that we can find clarity around things that matter most to you, the architect. It doesn't matter if you're the employee of a firm or you own your own firm. Maybe you circled the date on the calendar and you said 2022 is my year and you're on the runway to starting your own thing. Or maybe you have owned your own firm for a year or 10 years or 28 years, and you're starting to rethink or reimagine what that firm could or maybe even should be. All of the topics that we cover, one topic every day, they all fall under the broad umbrella of the business of architecture, and they're all the need to know topics for the success of small firm architects just like you. So thanks for joining us today. Welcome. Say hi when you get here. It's great to have you here. Sorry about the background music. Part of the game today is to guess what song is playing in the background.
I'm looking forward to that game.
Yeah, I know you are.
I love games. I love games, Jeff.
Catherine loves games and rules, if you haven't figured that out yet.
Which go together, by the way. Rules, Jake, that's what a game is, something you're doing with rules.
There's a direct correlation there.
Absolutely.
Right. As usual, for Context and Clarity Live, Katharine MacPhail has joined me today. Hi, Katharine.
Hello.
Hopefully things are a little calmer where you are than on this end of the phone line.
I would say so. So far, anyway. It's just another Thursday over here.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, we've got the two soup cans with the string pulled pretty tight at this point. So we'll see how this goes today.
What could go wrong?
Nothing. Nothing is impossible.
All
right, let me look. Who is? I think on my screen I see Kurt over there on Twitch joining us from Flint, Michigan. I think he's first on my screen, which means that he is the winner of today's John Kinney Memorial Crocheted Bathtub Award. Congratulations, Kurt. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for holding up the Twitch community over there. Glad that you're over there. Scott Thrift is in warm, hazy San Francisco. Welcome back, Scott. And he's over on LinkedIn. Benita, thanks for the wave from Atlanta. Glad you're joining us today. Jefferson from Los Angeles, linking in, as he says. He's on LinkedIn. Chris Novelli has joined us from YouTube. Says, can't seem to find on Facebook yet. Sure, it's just lagging behind. Uh-oh. Hopefully it picks up on Facebook here momentarily. But thanks for the heads up. And let's see, Benita says, welcome to the range. Yeah, that's one reason I'm sitting in a Starbucks right now is because I'm in traffic and torrential rain. Let's see. Chris says Catherine's the game master. She certainly is. Vanessa, welcome from upstate New York. Thanks for the wave from up there. Glad you're joining us today. Kurt celebrating. It has been a long time since Kurt won a Crochet Bathtub Award. If you happen to be on Facebook right now, maybe you're commenting, maybe you're typing away, putting things in the comment section that are not showing up on the screen, and you're going, what's going on? What's up here? What's wrong with this situation? Well, it's probably because you're in a private Facebook group, which has privacy policies, obviously. Facebook won't allow your name and your likeness and so on to leave Facebook to come over here to Restream, which is the platform that we use. However, we have a solution. Down at the bottom left of the screen right now is a URL. You can type this into your browser window, chat.restream.io/FB, sort of like Facebook. Chat.restream.io/FB. And once you do that, a couple of clicks later, you will give Facebook permission to talk to Restream, and all of your problems, every single one of them will be solved. They'll be taken away just with a few clicks. So try that out. And hopefully somebody is actually seeing this on Facebook. We had this problem last week, didn't we?
We've had a lot of weird problems lately with Restream.
I think we should blame it on Zuckerberg. No, I'm blaming it on Mark Zuckerberg.
Sure.
That's sure to get us banned. All right. Maybe. Let's see. Leslie is joining us from Transylvania, North Carolina. Welcome back, Transylvania, Leslie, over on YouTube. And Melanie has found us on YouTube as well. All right. So if we're not showing up on Facebook, Chris says it's still not showing up there. If someone or all of you would do us a favor and just post, hey, jump over to the EntreArchitect YouTube channel to find Context and Clarity Live, that would be a help. Let's get everybody over there since we seem to have a communication issue there. In the meantime, let's get this started. We have a guest, actually two guests today. They're waiting patiently in multi-green rooms. We're bi-coastal. We're all over. We're coming close to our goal of breaking the internet today. We have two guests in two different green rooms, green M&Ms in both of the green rooms, so you don't need to worry about that. They're waiting back there patiently for us. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. Let's get it kicked off here. Our guest today are both Cornell-educated architects. They have both taught and or still teach design and architecture classes in different programs around the country. And maybe their stories diverge from it. I don't know. One is a practicing architect and an educator. The other is an R&D at Adidas, over on the consumer products, the shoe company. It's probably not called a shoe company, sportswear company. I'm not sure. We'll have to get a clarification on that. But together, our two guests today have formed a company, a consultancy that they call Out of Architecture, where they help people like you and people like me explore the value of your education, of your skills, of your talents, the value both inside the profession of architecture and outside of the profession. So let me click a couple of buttons here. Erin Pellegrino and Jake Rudin, welcome to Context and Clarity Live. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Super happy to be here.
It's great to have you. Thanks for bearing with the technical issues today and the music. Although I don't know,
this is a great roller skating song from my youth. Is everything all right?
We're going to get all kinds of
we should have more music on Context and Clarity.
Well, you know what? I wonder if that's why we're not on Facebook. Maybe they're blocking us because of the
seriously, because you can totally tell what it is.
Yeah, well, we may get in trouble here. I don't know.
Well, but yeah, okay. Well, that's all right. We've been in trouble before.
We're going to bust it out. Erin and Jake, two of the things that I've encouraged everybody to do is, first of all, go to outofarchitecture.com and check out your website and look at the testimonials there and look at everything that you're doing. And I've also encouraged everyone to go over and listen to the Business of Architecture podcast. I think it's episode 411, where you talk with Ryan Willard, who, by the way, for everybody out there, Ryan is a past Context and Clarity Live guest, probably close to 2 years ago now, or a year and a half maybe. But first of all, that's a fantastic conversation with Ryan. And I think for me, that really kind of cracks open a lot of things that we talk about in Context and Clarity. When I first reached out to you, we were really kind of on the heels of, I'll call it the SciArc debacle, the panel discussion that they had. We had our own panel discussion where we talked about, what is it like working in architecture? And I love this as a follow-up because, one question is, do you need to work in architecture? Now, all week I've been volunteering to receive the hate mail. If
did you get any?
Not that I know of, but I don't check the mailbox that often. So
the spam filters are working well.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even open my email. I don't know. But question number one, maybe, does someone that goes to architecture school, right, that's educated as an architect, do they have to go into architecture?
I'm sure that we would both answer no, and I think it's an easy answer because for anyone who's been to architecture school, including all of us, there are so many lessons to be learned there that really often are lost when you transition into traditional practice, right? Lessons in creativity, lessons in client management. I mean, certainly those carry through if you're running your own practice and firm. Lessons in just reading people and figuring out, what the right responses are. But I think in general, there's also a huge variety of skills. And that's something that Erin and I noticed really early on, is that we loved being in the wood shop. We loved, drawing and making models. And architectural education seems to be based in, a practice that hasn't existed for a really long time, and is sort of preparing you for this artistry that is very different than what a lot of young architects experience when they first enter the profession. What has become really evident to us over the last 4 years, while we've been running this business and also transitioning into other careers, working at places like you mentioned at Adidas, we get to do so many of the things that we did in school, but in service of some other goal that's not necessarily buildings or the built environment. It doesn't mean that it has any less fulfillment, maybe purpose, passion, but it certainly does make people scratch their heads often when they say, "Oh, but you went to architecture school." And I think that's something that we have tried to address so many times, in that, being an architect, it's just a noun. People change careers and professions all of the time. And it's only this sort of maybe strange scenario because of the way that we have culturally pinpointed architects, the way in which we have sort of highlighted architects as, these very sexy, like very highly lauded individuals with, one singular creative focus. I mean, we're all humans. We all have different aspects to our career than just the final product. And what we've discovered is that, a lot of architects are really happy doing things beyond traditional practice.
And I mean, I think I'll follow up with that with just, I think it's our job as creatives, as people who are arbiters of the built environment, but also just arbiters of ideas, that, we control what it means to be an architect. And I think, honestly, the profession itself needs to adapt to a changing world. And in order to do that, we need to really sort of defy traditions in a healthy way, right? I mean, we're all used to an iterative process. We're all used to failing. That's one of the things that I think is really great, is that we've all gotten really good at, hey, let's toil through an idea, get it out, mess around with it, and then show it to a bunch of people and see what they have to say. And I mean, that's the only way worlds improve. And the fact that we don't do that more often, or we don't speak more oftenly about that, both within the profession and the changing boundary of it, just kind of relegates us to irrelevance eventually. So, I think there's so many other ways to be kind of architecturally adjacent, to use your skills and the value that you provide to the world in other ways. But there's also this idea of, this noun being an architect doesn't have to mean what it was when you went to school, just because at that point it was probably already outdated. And even, my students now, what I think they think an architect is probably still an outdated term. And I think the more we can own that and own the development of that and recognize all the skills that we have and the agency that we could have, the better off everyone is.
Jake and Erin, you both mentioned noun. And when you were talking to Ryan Willard on the business of architecture, you talked about the noun problem. And it struck me, I mentioned this earlier this week, that I was working with a client, and I had to play off that noun problem that you were talking about, because what we were struggling with at the moment as we were working together was, I think they had a noun problem. One, I'm an architect. Two, I'm a business owner, right? These are their own personal, their own personal perspectives. And so maybe we can talk about that noun problem a little bit more. But to me, the way that was playing out in this particular case is, if I put myself in their shoes, I identify myself as this. I identify myself as that, and I'm really struggling to let go of those two titles, of those two names, which is keeping me, and this is my opinion, but it's keeping me from achieving what I could possibly achieve, or becoming my best self, maybe even as an architect or as a business owner, or whatever all the terms are. Can you, one or both of you, talk a little bit more about the noun problem as you see it, and what you run into?
Erin, I would just start by saying, one of the things that is super common that I think clients bring to us is, we're looking through roles and they'll say, well, I don't have any agency experience. Or someone will come and they'll say, well, I'm such a generalist. And to me, that is like one of the proudest things you can call yourself, and I would lean into that by saying, I'm an expert generalist. I know a lot about a lot of things, not fully, mastery maybe in any one. But at the same time, when we go back to that agency question, I mean, you might consider yourself an architect and a business person, but if someone comes to you and as part of your architectural project, landscape is involved, you're gonna dive in and do it. If interiors are involved, if working through a kind of larger scoping or maybe master planning, or these are all areas that aren't necessarily the responsibility of the architect, and over the years have been relegated, I think, to more and more consultants and more specialists. So maybe architects feel like, well, I shouldn't be getting into that, or I'm not qualified, or, maybe I just don't hold the right title. But then you start to get even farther out into, visual branding and graphic design and marketing and all of these things that inherently architects are pretty good at because they're creatives. I think we don't practice them, and therefore we end up not being very good at them in the long run. I mean, I think most architects on this call would raise their hand and say, like, I am not good at marketing. That might not be the case for the two of you who run a pretty consistent live show and have, put your names out there and are selling your own brands. But certainly, I mean, Erin, I guess, would you agree that that's kind of one of the areas where we see people faltering the most?
Well, and I think it's not being able to take stock of your skill set, right? It's just not what becomes the focus, especially in school, but also in the practice. It's just like, just get it done, right? You may be really good at producing the drawings, or, maybe you put the presentations together really well because you've got a graphic eye. None of that ever gets, for the most part, acknowledged beyond this is what it takes to get the work done. But I think a skill audit is obviously incredibly useful, both to know what you're good at and also know what you're not. You don't know what you don't know, and therefore when you need to skill up, you need to skill up. But I think it's also a cultural thing. I mean, last night I was having dinner with 4 other architects, 2 of whom work in facades. One is my business partner, Charlie, and the other is a close friend and a client who's actually now leaving the world of architecture to go adjacent and work in SpaceX, right? And we were talking about some of the classes we teach, the job that they were headed off to, and just like, the weird public space we were in the seaport in New York. And at the end of the night, we were all saying goodbye. And one of the facade architects turns around and is like, this is the first time in a really long time I've hung out with all architects and we talked about stuff that wasn't just architecture. There are all these other things that we bring into our lives that when we kind of can open it up, we can be sort of, incredibly interesting and interested in other things. But I think the culture of architecture is the thing. It is a capital A thing. You worked this hard to become an architect. You own that title. You have to, eat, sleep, maybe not sleep, live and breathe architecture. And I think, again, it comes back to expanding that definition, but feeling like you have the security to do so. And I think for a very long time, I at least felt it, there was always a stigma around this idea of, what do you mean you're not going to just do what everyone else does and work, especially when you're graduating, work for one of the big name firms, go work for a star architect. It doesn't matter, what sort of wage they can pay you or what your work-life balance is going to be like. You get that. There's no way you turn it down. And I don't know. I just think we're, more, we can be more whole human beings and more whole practitioners and more whole designers and creatives if we recognize all these other facets of our skills and our life and our overall culture that we can bring to the skills that we bring to the world.
I don't know if it's, I see a question up on the screen, and maybe I can quickly add on before we touch on that. But I think to bring it back to a conversation we were having in the multiple green rooms before this, we had a little bit of a chat on burnout. And when we think about what it means as an architect to burn out, a lot of times that association becomes with having such a narrowed focus that you really don't have any other outlets. And as Erin said, it's there's work that is nourishing and there's work that is depleting. And if you narrow yourself down to work that is only depleting, that's when you get burned out. And as we can all recognize, it is a very real, very physical, kind of tolling emotional phenomenon. What's really amazing, though, is if we circle back all the way to our education and we think about the sort of general sense in which we learn design, in which we learn to see, like, a box not as just this cubic form, but as edges and corners and lines and the different shading and solid void and all of these elements, you can apply that in so many different ways. And the ability and the desire, and even just recognizing that very likely as an architect, as someone who went through that training, you want to have your hands in multiple things, is really important. And I think isolating yourself down to just one focus, as opposed to recognizing that maybe in order to stay engaged, I need the ability to jump between a certain set of various goals, various projects, various topics at any given time, I think is pretty important. And we often find that, there's this moment when we speak to architects who have been in the profession for 15 years and they say, well, I just want to narrow down and I just want to consult in this one specific aspect that I've been pigeonholed to in my firm. Usually we end up getting to the point where we say, well, it sounds like you actually want to do several things at once. And they go, yeah, but you can't do that. And that's just not, it's not true.
Well, so this morning we were talking about, all week we've been talking about this, but this morning we were talking about what we wanted to ask you about, and we were talking about the title of architect. And I think it was when you were talking to Ryan, you were talking about how people don't really want to let that go. So we were talking about that. So how do we get beyond the title of architect? And I feel like I could be open to a lot of things, but then when someone mentions like, well, don't call yourself an architect, I get a little bit like, well, then what? So how do we get beyond the title of architect?
I think everyone's degree of relationship to that title is going to be personal to them. Full disclosure, I'm the licensed architect in the duo. Jake is the recovering architect, so that's his RA. And I think I'll speak for both of us at the moment, which is that we wouldn't trade the training we've gotten for anything. Use it every day. But both of us also have MBAs, which we use every day as well. But we don't go around kind of calling ourselves, Jake Rudin MBA, Erin Pellegrino MBA. The architect title is something I do embrace, but I recognize that title means something to me. And most of the people I talk to that are not architects really are very ignorant to what that title actually is. They have this sort of nostalgic idea of blueprints, which I have never actually seen.
Wow.
In physical, actually, no, that's not true. There was
never even seen them, like in a museum or anything?
Blueprint of a burrito at 10th Ave Burrito in Belmar, New Jersey. But aside from that, actually seeing old school blueprints, no, I don't think I have. And I think that's just to say that I think most people, or one of our professors would call them normies, that are not in the architectural profession or know an architect or something, really have very little idea of what we do. Most of the questions I'm sure everyone in this digital room has gotten is, oh, you're an architect, so what kind of buildings do you do like hotels, or like do you focus, they have very kind of surface level questions about it, which is not to say that they're somehow not understanding of what may at least what the media may put out about what an architect does, but they don't know the type of thinking and training that we bring to creative problem solving. We make ideas out of nothing. And I think that is an incredibly powerful, title to ascribe to. I make ideas out of nothing, but it's our job to actually educate people on what that is. Now, that being said, if you want to go off and do a different thing, and we do have clients who come to us and say, I want to go work for Deloitte, I want to be a consultant, or I want to go back, we're more into the technical side and become an engineer, but how do I even talk about my experience as an architect and my experience as someone who's gone through that training, perhaps that professional experience, a series of types of projects that proves that I can speak that language, because the title itself doesn't encompass what a normal person would think an architect could do. I see that as a massive opportunity, right? It's like when one of my professors in school would look at a drawing or like a model I made and said, you're thinking about this like a fried egg. Why don't you think about it like a donut? And you have that kind of like aha moment, like, wow, what if I totally just reframe that? And then your mind starts to work, right? You can do that with a career pathway. You could do that with a job. Now, does that mean you're going to like immediately go and be a neurosurgeon? No, absolutely not. I don't mean that. But this idea that you can essentially understand the skills that you have and use that to define what it means to you to be an architect, that opens up a whole new world. So I don't think we have to run away from the title. Some people may need to retitle themselves, but I think it starts with understanding what defines us as an architect and then tooling that into what it is that you do next. Because I still very much call myself an architect, but I explain to people what I think that is.
See, I think what you're talking about right there is a really fundamental issue, not only for what we're talking about now, sort of the career and job search world, but also talking about the value that the public perceives in architects. Like you said, well, what do you do? Do you design hotels or whatever, blueprints, all of those things? So how do we, and your context typically, I'm assuming with your clients is really on the career side, and so I've got this talent, this perspective, et cetera, and so we can talk about it from that framed in that way, which is perfectly fine. Or we can look at it, I think, maybe from a 30,000 foot view and say, okay, well, the next person that walks in here, if we were to talk about the actual value of an architect, what would we actually talk about? Because it's not going to be the blueprints or even designing probably not going to be designing the Starbucks. How do you go about starting these conversations, I guess?
There's, as you mentioned, there's sort of the career side of this, and then there is actually the business side of this. And Erin and I do a little bit of advising on both. On the business side, I think it's recognizing that the structure of being an architect in the context of a business, especially if you're running your own firm, is not quite as, I'm the end all be all and architects can do everything by themselves. What I mean by that is this client that we have, she's running her own business. They received just two people, received a request from a very large Middle Eastern project, essentially formulated as a very large company with a seemingly kind of endless budget. And we were talking to them about what the scope that they're being asked to do means in terms of billing. And they said, well, these are this is what we would equate to our salaries. And we started to prod a little bit more. And there's all manner of kind of details into these projects. But one of the things that came up is, well, who's going to manage the project? Is the client going to provide a project manager? Are you project managing in addition to the consulting that you're doing, to the resources? And it was so intriguing that this is just something that hadn't really crossed their mind. It's like, who's going to do that work? It's inherent, I think, in a lot of us as architects that, well, we're receiving a project, we're going to manage it. But there are specialists out there whose roles and responsibilities relate to key milestones and dates and gates and all of these things that PMs love. And the fact that we absorb those without thinking about them is one of the reasons why I think we just don't consider our value to be as great as it really is. From the individual side, it's very similar. So we have individual clients that come to us. We say, okay, what do you do? And they say, well, I know Revit, and I usually work on this scale of building, and maybe I coach or mentor this small subset of architects or whatever it is. Then we say, okay, what do you think your value would be if you went to work in retail design? If you went to go to work for a business whose goal is not to build architecture, but to connect people with a product. And they say, that's a really interesting question. I never thought about that. And I say, okay, well, would you be shocked if I said that you could be making, 30%, 50%, some grossly, disgusting salary at a company that has no intention of focusing on architecture, but needs architecture as a way to sort of track their brand through the entire customer experience? And if I ask you now about your experience, and I ask you about the narratives that you've worked on with clients, the kind of way that you've incorporated a client's desire to expose their brand to the customer. Maybe it's more service design, maybe it's workplace, maybe it's big Google headquarters or whatever it is. That narrative starts to reveal, wow, like this is all the value that I've brought to this equation, especially when I think of it as putting a big brand sticker on a piece of architecture, which we don't. We don't equate our love of space and form and circulation and experience to someone being really impressed and going and dropping $1,000 on a piece of, apparel, footwear, whatever it is. And that connection then becomes really tangible. And the more we talk to architects, I think the more Erin and I find that we try to draw out of them. We try to draw out of them, okay, when you're pricing yourself, what value are you providing? And that question is so tough to answer. But when you start to look on the other side and say, what are you enabling for the customer? What value are they going to get because they are using your services? That's a lot easier to put your finger on. And you can do that with your career as well by hiring me. Not only am I weaving all of these things together, but this and this will be possible. I think as a business, it's even more important to do that. And it's very difficult to unlock that key to say, well, rather than basing my consulting fee on an hourly that I feel like is a reasonable salary, I'm going to look at what the output is and simply say that you're going to be gaining more than you're going to be spending. And if I happen to be making triple what I would want as a salary, that's none of your business, right? That's literally my business. It is actually, in fact, my business. So it's a tough line to walk.
But I think what you touched on is incredibly important, right? We have this in EntreArchitect, we have this whole build your course and workshop, and that's really what we're talking about is what's the value that you're creating or generating, or the result that you're generating. What's the value of that? So thanks for taking that in both directions. I appreciate kind of looking at it in the two different ways. If someone is a student right now, and I haven't scrolled all the way through the comments, so I don't recognize right off the top if we have any students with us. But if someone is a student right now, what do they need to be thinking about? Erin, I know you're teaching pro practice. I teach pro practice. One of NAB's big pushes is the idea of path to licensure. I prefer to call that path to the profession, because to me that also sets up the conversation of maybe path from the profession or path from school. So if there's somebody that's in school right now, what do they need to be thinking about as they prepare to go out into the quote unquote real world, and whether or not they end up in a traditional firm setting or in an architecture adjacent profession or role or whatever it is? Where do they need to be in their headspace? What do they need to be preparing right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I teach ProPrac out of a pure sort of love to do it. I love nerding out about business. I love nerding out about how architecture can walk this line, and that was the reason I started teaching it. The reason I keep teaching it, though, is getting the sort of feedback and speaking with the students about what's really on their mind, and realizing both, I think, recognizing the insecurities that I had leaving school, and seeing what they're dealing with, not only I left school obviously pre-pandemic, but adding the sort of state of the world on top of that, and realizing that it's just incredibly important to be talking about what is that path to the profession. I love that you put it that way. And really, because that's what is the way that you're going to have agency in the world. And I think I say this a lot, but I like being a broken record on this point, which is that I don't think anyone becomes or goes to architecture school if they're not an optimist or an idealist in some way. If you want to put something, or you have this inclination that you might want to put something on the earth, you're doing that because you want to go out there and do something good and cool, and you want to get involved, right? So what we talk about with our clients, and what I talk about mainly in my ProPrac class, is how do you want to spend your time for the rest of your life when you leave here? And that's a huge, daunting question, right? I don't even know that question now, being in the profession for, over a decade. But when we frame it that way, right? Because they're all worried about their resumes and their portfolios, and I got to find this job, and I'm doing thesis, and oh crap, this paper's due, and all this other stuff, which is, normal life shit, really. Sorry. The normal life stuff, which is always going to be there. But we talk about, and I tell them from the outset, I am not teaching you this course to you right now as a third, fourth, fifth year. I'm teaching this course to the person that's going to be from 5 to 10 years from now in some sort of management position, either in their firm, in a new business venture that they've started, in, whatever that ends up being. The person I'm talking to, or the person I'm trying to speak to here, is not the person that's worried about, the immediate next step. It's that person. And I want you to try to put yourself in that frame of mind and say, what do I want to be doing with my time? Because time is the only finite resource that we have. Architects, I've found, I feel this way. I know this of everyone that I know that is an architect. We have tons of energy. We find ways to make energy. We find ways to kind of bring it to a project until burnout happens, right? But we have a passion for what we do. And that energy is something that if you get in this mindset of, being able to work on yourself and allow yourself to kind of rest and whatnot, that energy is an infinite resource. But your time is the thing that isn't. So how do you want to allocate and spend your time in order to make sure that energy is really what keeps you going? It's kind of a little bit maybe like the Energizer Bunny, but really, like, I give them a final assignment where, they've got to submit their resume and their portfolio, or if they're looking to go to grad school, they've got to give me a CV and a comprehensive portfolio as opposed to a short works thing. But I also ask them to basically take, their iCal or their sketchbook or whatever, and draw out a week 5 years in the future and put in how they want to be spending their time, ideally. And I don't want them to say, well, I want to be, celebrating getting my license. No, not that. Do you want to be on site 3 days a week? Do you want to be at a point where you're maybe on track to be a PM, or you are a PM and you're meeting with contractors on site and you're doing that? And do you want to be home by, 5, or do you need to be home by 3 because you want to start a family early? Do you want to be doing the funny one we always tell people, even though Jake and I have never done it, is like, do you want to be doing hot yoga twice a week? Put that on there. Do you want to be traveling multiple days a week because you want to, kind of use your ability or use the skills that you have to kind of go see new places? Put that on there. And I think when we design it that way, you're never going to, predict the future in that way, but you're going to get people who say, I like this wood shop thing. I would like to be in a shop, maybe on the weekends, or maybe I'm at a design build firm and I'm actually working, on site with some of the contractors or whatever, right? It helps them to think about what do they prioritize, and then back that out into how do you spend your time. And that's an exercise we do with a lot of our clients, but a lot of the time our young clients who are just like, they're so full of energy and passion. It's just like, how do I go out there and do it? And it's like, well, you kind of got to back into that based on what your priorities are. And it's hard to ask someone, what are your priorities? Like, what are your goals for the next 5 years? That's a really obtuse and somewhat invasive question. But when you break it down based on, here's how I actually want to be spending my time, people, I think, get a little bit less daunted by that.
And the question you can ask yourself if you are trying to solve this without getting too grandiose is, especially as a young either student or recent graduate, is, what would your friends have stereotyped you as in architecture school? Were you the model maker? Were you the renderer? Were you the person who was always computational design or super into robotics, or, just really like honed in on graphics and doing all the graphics for all the, the parties that you weren't supposed to be having, but you still posted up all over Studio because you thought the posters looked really cool. When you kind of look at it from that lens and you think like, oh, that's the stuff that I just was naturally drawn towards, we can use that, and you can use that to sort of identify, oh, maybe, the reason why I put off writing my paper in order to do that was because I just really enjoyed it, not because I'm a lazy son of a gun or, whatever that the alternate thought pathway might be.
I love that. Love that perspective. What's the makeup of your clientele? Or all right, guess the song.
Sorry, it's a good one.
You got dancing going over there. Are your clients mainly students? Are they emerging professionals? Are they mid-career? What does your clientele look like?
They are all over the place, honestly. And we've had clients who are still in school to clients who are at the top of the firm, clients who have been in the practice for 30 plus years who are interested in moving to kind of a more of a consulting role or interested in just, focusing on a specific parameter of their career. Maybe it's time, maybe it's money, maybe it's both. We've had clients who I would say there's buckets, but I'm always shocked. We have an intro call coming up with a client who said, hey, like I've been doing this thing for 7 years and, it's much more in the legal profession. I went to architecture school. I got a JD. And now I'm kind of thinking like, what's next? Maybe it's not law, maybe it's not architecture, maybe it's some combination, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. So they are really all over the place, but we definitely, could bucket them into, there's really that like very early years where a lot of students are just coming out and saying like, I already know that I want to do something different. And then we have clients who really are thinking like, I've put in my time. Maybe I've ticked the box of getting licensed. We have tons of people that say like, I just really wanted to get licensed and now I'm there and I've done it. And then I think there are sort of like the mid-career burnout where really it's about like, just, I'm in a crisis mode, and I need some support. And just very briefly, there was a question from Twitch, like how do students pay for our services? We have student pricing and we honestly didn't start this business to make money. So a lot of what we do is just completely based on how can we help you, and like price is something we really just tried to make not be a barrier to getting support. Frankly, we basically turned on billing because we only have a limited number of hours, that are usually either very early in the day or very late in the day. And so we've got to manage those in a way where, it's sustainable for us and where we can also have the support of a small team, which is really, a big part of how we help clients and reach the right kind of people.
That's very architectural of you. I feel like, because I was looking at your website and you both have full-time jobs. So when do you do this? So, that would be typical, I would think, that you just keep working. And then also not charging people who can't pay. I relate to that as well. So I don't know. It just seems like what I would expect.
Well,
yeah. Well, so I'll just make a couple points here. One of the things is, going back to that point about nourishing versus depleting work, there's a lot of psychic income that comes from this. We do all of our intro calls on Fridays and we look forward to it every week because we meet the most awesome, interesting people. And if we can provide some help and sort of see people's careers change, or also just like expand our network with fascinating, people who are doing cool stuff. Like we just genuinely love that. There's a selfish part of this too, which is the fact that Jake and I have been, best friends since like second semester architecture school. And it's a way for us to be on two coasts and still work on projects together. Those used to be models or, things out, out in the woods in Ithaca. And now this is the project that we have that kind of keeps us together, but also allows us to help a bunch more people. And then also, I mean, yes, we both have full-time jobs. This is obviously something that is a passion project for us, but we've taken those looks at our lives, and I won't speak for Jake explicitly, but I certainly have, and have said, like, how do I want to be spending my time? I have the luxury and sometimes the burden of the fact that I do run my own practice, but I have an excellent partner who helps me with that. And we also teach. And so there's a balance there that allows that to happen. And we also recognize that the work that we do here reciprocates back into the work that we do elsewhere, especially with, the teaching on my side, and also with the fact that there are a lot of alignments in, sportswear and in the role that Jake has at Adidas, where he gets to meet a lot of fantastic talent that may or may not be a good fit for Adidas, although that becomes a different thing. We have the ability to bring value of what we do here into other parts of our lives.
Yeah. So Jeff wanted me to get back to this question. What commonalities do you see with architects breaking out of architecture? So is it that, and when I was thinking about, I was really struck by in Ryan's interview, when you said it's heartbreaking to get out of school and realize that's not what you thought you were signing up for. When I think you said it was heartbreaking, didn't you? And I was like, yeah, it is kind of. It's really disappointing. It's really disappointing. So are those people who are perpetually disappointed, are those the ones that end up coming for you, or? No,
I think one of the most interesting commonalities is that people say, I was never the designer who was comfortable with a blank piece of paper. And it's really interesting because I think the architects who really enjoy playing off constraints, really enjoyed the kind of like, maybe they were the person in the group work who wasn't necessarily the innovator. They were the person who kind of came to the table and would say, like, that's a really interesting idea, but like, here's how I would refine it, and this is the way that we could kind of practically apply that or merge these two ideas together. Or they just sort of understood a lot of what was going on. And I go back to the, again, that's like an indicator of a really strong generalist. I also find, though, that there is about 50% this kind of disappointment, but then there's 50%, gosh, this sounds so cheesy, like hope, of, I just know that, I've seen what my colleagues have gone on to do. I've seen roles that maybe we studied in architecture at companies like IDEO, or even within the architectural community, like mass design, that's really has this purposeful focus. That's where I want to be. Like, I don't want to be at one of the big 3-letter name firms. And there are people who get a lot of fulfillment out of that. And that's awesome. And we really appreciate that. But there's also not spots at all those places for every graduate. We're graduating like so many more architects, quote unquote architects, than we need in actual architectural practice. And we have clients that go to work in tech, or that go to work in design of some other kind of consumer good or product or architectural space that's, wouldn't be something that maybe a traditional architecture firm would either be capable or interested in doing. And it's just amazing to think that, I think, and disappointing to think that we went through school without hearing about all those opportunities, and that faculty at so many of these universities are brought on because they have a very specific kind of 2-person practice that is winning these really weird awards for work that they did for free, or work that they did with student labor that was free, that then they, claimed as their own. And then, I mean, like, I'm not talking about anyone specific here, but I really do think that's a common story. And I think you actually point to a lot of firms that act that way and benefit from that. And then you realize, wow, like, well, where did they get, the luxury of being able to do all that stuff? And not everyone has that luxury. And it's like a super privileged position to be in, to be able to chase that Starchitect dream. We do have clients that are interested in academia, and that is probably even a harder pathway to go down than just traditional architecture. Is that kind of architecture plus academia? Oh, well, maybe I have to have a studio partner who's kind of, one of them's teaching and one of them is actually running the practice. And how do you divide that? And it's, it's really interesting. So the commonalities are maybe hard to pinpoint, but there's a few stereotypes for sure.
Yeah, and I think, Jake, you bring up, I think, something that, Katharine and Jeff, you were talking about initially, what kind of spurred our initial conversation, which was this, issue at SciArc, or what happened at SciArc. Unfortunately, sometimes the commonalities, especially around burnout or with clients who really come to us in crisis, are really heartbreaking in the sense that it's, we've had clients who've come to us saying, female clients who've come to us saying, I just can't work with my team anymore. I'm afraid to tell them that I'm getting married or that I want to start a family. Or I'm afraid to tell, and this is regardless of gender, like I have a family member who's really ill, or, like essentially afraid to be human, whatever it means to be human to you, whatever that has to do with your gender, your race, your economic situation. These are unfortunate commonalities that I'm not saying we hear every day, but we hear them a lot, and it's not unknown in the profession, but we're just finally starting to really talk about them. When people come to us and say, like, I know why I'm not getting promoted, and it has nothing to do with the work that I'm doing. It has something to do with the fact that I'm just a different color than the person who did get promoted, or I'm being treated a certain way because of XYZ, or, my project manager has basically said I'm useless until I get to a certain point where I could be of use, but there's no training or throughput to make that happen. So unfortunately, some of the commonalities are issues that we just have that are systemic in the profession and systemic in other professions as well. It's not just us. And that is really, really tough, because it's not to say that, like, okay, once we get you out of architecture, you're going to be fine. It's rather, okay, how do we address that what you're going through is not okay just because it's happening and everyone's letting it happen or whatever. But also, like, how do we then even just totally reframe and try to help? Because we're not therapists, right? We're not here, and we're not trained to do that. But sometimes there's a lot of value and a lot of impact with two people who have been through what they've been through in terms of, like, architecture school and boot camp and and just saying, like, it's okay for you to not want to be in this situation. And the amount of times we've had people on calls with us kind of like emote or break down or just say they just needed to be told that is a significantly non-zero number. And I don't think we knew that going into this, but it's become another really amazing part of what we can do to try to help people realize that, like, this is what change starts to look like. Because it doesn't happen. I tell my students this too. It doesn't happen from the top down. It just can't. It's going to take too long. It happens kind of as a community all together, saying that, like, no, we could do this better. And what we bring to the world is so much better than how you're being treated at the moment.
And this goes way beyond just architecture. I mean, I have the opportunity to mentor quite a number of people at Adidas, and I absolutely love the work that I do there. And I think a lot of that goes both ways. But I've had, Adidas colleagues come up to me and say, hey, what you shared about salary negotiation was really impactful for me as a young person, because, maybe our senior leadership don't have the issue of, not understanding that they could stand up for themselves or, elaborate on a value that they bring. But I didn't know that. I didn't know that that was something I could do as someone just kind of coming into a big company. And to see that is really impactful. Or, I really enjoy where I am, but I didn't feel comfortable having a conversation about other opportunities within the company. I still want to be here. How do I have that discussion with my leadership, my manager, without, alienating myself, right? And these are worries that, I mean, architects certainly would have, right? Is, hey, I don't like this part of my job. I don't know an architecture student who is ever told how to have a conversation like that. And it might not be even something that the two of you touch on in professional practice. So we are trying to open these discussions up for people, and we recognize and know and are familiar with the problems in architecture, but it's not just architecture. It's also out of architecture. Thanks,
That's a
Katharine.
nice way to put it. Ties a nice little bow on it. I know we've actually passed the top of the hour. This is another one of those conversations. I say this a lot, I guess, but it's another one of those conversations. I wish we could, we'll just continue for a couple of hours. But to be respectful for everybody's time, maybe one thing we could do to wrap the conversation up is to ask, for everybody that's either here with us live or watching this later in some replay version, what's one thing that somebody, maybe everybody, ought to do individually for themselves to really think about, I don't know if you call it their most successful future or their best vision of their future. What's something we really need to be paying attention to?
I mean, I don't want to be repetitive and say the time exercise is important, although I do think it is. A question I ask myself a lot, and Jake and I ask ourselves a lot, and we'll ask our clients is what does success look like? And not from like a monetary standpoint, but like if you needed to make, and everyone I think knows that there are certain things in their life, whether it's their career or their, personal relationships, whatever, everyone knows that there are like certain changes they can make to make it better. And we're architects, so we're constantly improving. It's our job to look at something that's seemingly perfect and find everything that's going to go wrong and fix it. So I think the thing there is, okay, so a year from now or a month from now, when this project is over, what does success look like? And sometimes that's just finishing the project. Sometimes it's just getting to the next milestone and surviving and living to kind of design another day. But if that question, when you ask yourself that question, if you can't see beyond the next week or a month or so because you're so kind of encumbered, then I think you need to have an honest conversation with yourself about how overly taxed you may be, and what would success look like a year from now if it wasn't that way. I use the 5-year exercise with my students just because I typically teach BArcs and 5 years of a degree. They went into this thinking, all right, when I graduate, I know I got a diploma, then what? Thinking of it in 5-year chunks is sometimes helpful, but even for me, sometimes I like to do goals in sort of, next month, the next 3 months, the next 6 months to a year, and then overall. And for me, it's like, all right, if I hold myself accountable, like every few pages in my Moleskine is that list. And what does success look like on a daily level, on a weekly level, on a monthly, on a yearly level? Then at least it helps me kind of break down how I want to spend my time.
I think that's super helpful. And I would just say, from the perspective of someone who's a little less far out, I get asked a lot, like, how do you feel when you're helping people who are going into roles that like maybe you would want to be going into? Like, doesn't it kind of, if you've been in the same role I've been in the same role for 5 years. And I think a lot of people probably listening have been in the same position for a decade, 20 years, 30 years. And one of the things that really helps me is just to kind of sit down every once in a while and evaluate why I'm still in my position. So almost the converse, or complementing to what Erin is saying about what does success look like. And for me, my management, the ability to do and work on a huge variety of projects, trump, a lot of the really shiny salary numbers that are jobs that make you work 90 hours a week on one thing, that are, maybe would require me to move or to be in a different place, which is really important to me, like that sense of, rootedness or stability. And so having that discussion with yourself, just kind of allowing yourself to play out like, okay, who was the latest person that, in my network kind of made that change? And I went, oh man, and really thinking about what would it feel like? Would I actually take that job? If I was jealous of them, why was I jealous? Was it really just because it was a big number? Is it because I was actually interested in the work they were going to be doing? Maybe you reach out to them and find out like, hey, how is it? I had a very good friend who went to work for Apple, And I sent him a message a few months after he started to work there. The numbers were insane. Let me just say that. But his response that was like, I'll talk to you in a year. I was like, okay, I can see. I see what's happening. He made a very conscious decision to go do that, to say, I'm going to use this as a stepping stone. I know this is going to be really an intense amount of work. But to Erin's point of what does success look like, think about it in terms of like what it would feel like also. You know, when you think like, oh, that's what success looks like for me, how do you feel when you hit that milestone? Like, are you even more exhausted than you are right now? Maybe it's a bad idea. You know, are you, have you saved towards some goal or made progress or actually maybe backed away from the amount of work you're doing? Those are really interesting things to think about. So
I think both of those, that's great perspective on both of those. There's so much to unpack there, but great advice, and I think I cut you off there.
No, I was just thinking about what success means to me.
Catherine's going through the exercises, as I'm sure a lot of people in our audience are. If you want to know more about what Erin and Jake are doing, outofarchitecture.com, the URL's in the bottom left of your screen right now. Go check it out. Go look at their offerings, find out more about them, reach out to them. I'm sure there's a lot that you could explore here with the help of Erin and Jake. So to both of you, thank you very much for joining us for this conversation and for everything that you're doing. I think it's really important work for students, for emerging professionals, for all of those people that you mentioned. But I also think, I'm not just, this is not hyperbole. I think it's important as we think about the future of architecture. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you.
very
This has
much
been
for having
fantastic.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate you being here. And everybody out there in our live audience, enjoy the music. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you for making context and clarity a thing. I say this just about every week, but I really mean that, because without showing up and making context and clarity a thing, we wouldn't be having conversations with Erin and Jake. So thank you for that. Thank you for this opportunity. Now, tomorrow is the final Friday in the month of May, which means it's Context and Clarity Book Club.
Book club
Discussion. Yep. Our book for this month was Sorry I'm Late, I Didn't Want to Come by Jessica Pan. So that'll be the discussion. So let me, Erin, I'm going to tell you, I don't know if you've read it.
I haven't, but
So Jessica Pan is an introvert, and she decided to spend a year essentially living like an extrovert, going through all kinds of different experiences and documenting them and turning this into a book. So for all of the introverts out there, it's a fantastic book. It's an entertaining read, but I think there's a lot of really great insights in it. We'll be discussing that tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. And on Context and Clarity Live next week, Jessica Pan, the author of Sorry I'm Late, I Didn't Want to Come, will be our guest. Context and Clarity Live. So we'll talk to her next Thursday.
That's super
awesome.
exciting. And
Yeah, I'm
gonna buy
maybe
that.
we can do the reverse order, because I think Erin and I are slated for our book to come out at the end of October. And so maybe sometime the end of the year, early next year, we can be your book club guests.
Yeah,
Absolutely. That would be awesome.
because we never got to what do you do with a 55-year-old owner who wants a new job. We didn't get to that. So
Yeah.
There's a chapter in the book.
Is
There's
it
a chapter
good?
in the
All
book.
right. I'll sign
All
up.
right. All right.
All right. Thanks so much, guys.
So we have to get that book to get you guys back to talk about that and talk about the new book. That'd be fantastic. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody out there. Again, appreciate all of you. Thank you for all of this. Please take a little bit of time to breathe, relax, find a way to get rejuvenated. We're going to do this all over again tomorrow and next week as well. There's a lot of craziness going on out there. Please be well. Stay safe. Keep those around you safe and well. And I hope I'll see you around somewhere sometime soon.